Welcome to Camp Constitution Radio with your host, Hal Shurtleff. This show is heard on WBCQ, The Planet, every Monday at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time. And copies of the show are also available on YouTube usually within a week or so. We upload it on the Camp Constitution YouTube channel. And we have a couple of exciting guests. Of course, all our guests are exciting. But before we bring our guest on, I want to talk a little bit about the camp, the sponsor, the Camp Constitution, the sponsor of this event. The Camp Constitution is an all-volunteer association of freedom-loving Americans who, among other things, run a weekly summer camp in Ringe, New Hampshire. In addition to that, we publish some books, and we make available some out-of-print items. You can visit our campconstitution.net website, and you could see some of the great things we have available. And actually, this show is usually pre-recorded, and it's a Friday evening, and our guests are in Washington State, so we're calling them at late our time, and we're on a homeschool show. The Mass Hope homeschool show. Camp Constitution has an information table, and we've been very successful, meeting lots of good people interested in participating in camp, and we're teaching people about the Constitution. There's lots of folks out there that have little understanding of our Constitution, and we offer a 10-question quiz to get an idea where people are coming from. Now, homeschool types tend to be much more informed on the Constitution than your typical, than the average American. And that's a real testimony to the positive things that are happening in the homeschool community. And we just had Dr. Duke Pesta give a presentation on Common Core. He's actually in town doing some workshops at this homeschool show. And folks, this Common Core is really bad, and it doesn't matter whether you're left or right or what party you belong to. Common Core must be defeated. It is an absolute disaster, and it's interesting that not one state legislature that was voted for it. It was adopted by 46 states, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation have pumped over $6 billion. $1 billion a year in the 6 years they've been promoting this. So, anyway, it's something that we need to defeat as soon as possible. It is an absolute disaster. It's not something that you can work around or something you hope will get better. It will definitely, as bad as the public schools are now, this would be so the nail in the coffin. And not only that, but it affects homeschoolers. You think, well, we're homeschooled, we don't really, well, first off, you have an obligation to expose evil, period, regardless if it affects you directly or indirectly. But it does affect homeschoolers directly. And it affects them directly because the SATs will become Common Core compliant, the GEDs will become Common Core compliant, and even some homeschool textbooks have become Common Core compliant. So there are lots and lots of problems with Common Core, and it does affect homeschoolers, and it affects our country. And we need to take a strong stand against it. Now, this past March, I had the opportunity to attend a homeschool show in Maine, in Rockland, Maine. Homeschoolers of Maine had their annual homeschool convention. And right next to our table was a very, very wonderful brother and sister team with their mom, the Titanic Heroes. And Cady and her brother Benjamin. Cady is 17, I think Benjamin is 15. And they have started this, I refer to it as a ministry that's officially a nonprofit organization. You can find them on the website, titanicheroes.org. And they have a great desire to teach people about the heroism of many people, many of the passengers and crew members on the Titanic, and also the clergy members. And I've always been a history buff, and I remember many years ago, there was back in the 60s, that's how I'm 56, there was a show called Time Tunnel, and their first episode had the sinking of the Titanic. And there's a museum in Massachusetts, in Indian Orchard, which is a neighborhood of Springfield, a Titanic museum. And I got a chance to meet the curator, and he actually knew us, Titanic Survivors. And my dad was born a day before the ship sank, in 1912. So this young brother and sister team, I was just so impressed, and they've gone beyond that. So I want to welcome. It just came on, so I want to welcome both Benjamin and Cady. Can you hear me out there?
Hi, how are you?
I'm doing fine, thank you. Had a very long day. We're at a homeschool show in Worcester. Believe it or not, the snow has melted in New England. So yeah, it actually it was kind of cool today, but we've actually had some nice weather. Now you're in Washington State, correct?
We are, so it's getting pretty nice up here.
Oh, that's good. Good. So, well, I was just telling before you came on. I was just telling the folks how I met you at this homeschool show in Maine back in March of 2015, just a month and a half ago, and I was just so impressed by both of you. And you're 17.
Correct.
And your brother's 15.
Yes.
And let me ask you, what motivated you to start this? Now, first, you're homeschoolers, right?
Yeah, Benjamin and I have both been homeschooled ever since our mom started us. And so the homeschooling then transferred into Titanic Heroes as Benjamin and I grew older, and that's what started Titanic Heroes back 3 years ago. So he was 12, I was 14. And
now you're the tender age of 17. And now you've written a couple of books.
I have, yeah. I wrote one on a priest who was on board Titanic, Father Thomas Biles, and his story was actually what started Titanic Heroes and the idea for our nonprofit organization. Father Biles was a priest on board the RMS Titanic, and I found out about his story and got in contact with his family and began to write a book about him. And then as Benjamin and I found the story of Father Biles, we found all these other stories about heroes on board the Titanic as well. And we wanted a way to tell their stories. So because he and I have sort of a history in speech and debate, we wanted to use those skills to talk about heroism and virtue in the Titanic. So that's what Titanic Heroes does.
Now, I know there's been, the most recent movie came out, 95, 96?
97, actually. James
97, and it made it look like, it was an exciting movie. There was, because of the special effects that maybe weren't there for some of the earlier movies, but it had this class concept where the third-class passengers were treated, nobody really cared about them and so forth. So, and I know most of that was not true. So I think there's been a lot of, just like any movie, especially if it's a Hollywood production, there's a lot of misinformation in there. So let's set the record straight on that, if you could.
Yes. So the movie's portrayal of the class distinction, and specifically what you were talking about, was basically third-class passengers being shut down below decks or not allowed into lifeboats. And that's something that actually a lot of people have said happened and was obviously shown in the movie. However, if you look at the actual facts of the Titanic incident, a couple interesting things to note are that, first of all, most of the steerage or third-class passengers were actually immigrants going to America to seek a new life. And because of that, many of the passengers who were in third class actually didn't speak English. And so when the crash happened and when the officers were trying to communicate to people what had happened, some of that got lost in the shuffle, and many people didn't actually understand what was happening because they couldn't speak the language. And the second reason is simply because of the position of where the third-class passengers were in relation to the ship. The steerage cabins were towards the bottom of the ship, towards the bow of the ship, closer to the actual surface of the ocean, whereas the first-class passengers simply had easier access to the deck. And so, mathematically, looking at the ship, looking at how it sank, the first-class passengers had a greater chance of actually getting to the deck than the steerage passengers ever had. So, in reality, and looking at survivor accounts, there really was no organized attempt to save first-class people over steerage people. It's simply an unfortunate thing that happened that many third-class passengers died whether it was because they couldn't understand what was going on, or because they weren't in a position to get up onto the deck, or simply the fact that there were simply more third-class passengers and therefore more people died, if that makes sense.
Oh yes. So that's but Hollywood always have to have this class consciousness concept, which is it's regrettable that they do that. Now, you were interested in the members of the clergy that were on the ship. I think the movie portrayed a couple of people in somewhat positive manners, and your sister wrote a book on one of the priests. Now, there were how many members of the clergy that you know about that were on the ship?
Well, we know for a fact that there were 3 Catholic priests, and in terms of ministers, I believe that there were 4 or 5 other ministers other than them. A couple that come to mind are the Reverend Ernest Carter, as well as the Reverend John Harper. And those are probably 2 of the most notable ministers on board. John Harper, in particular, is actually quite well known for his heroism. And so, all in all, there were probably about 8. And obviously, there could be some that we don't know about, or that some passengers that we don't know were ministers. But it was probably about 8.
About 8 of them. In addition to the Titanic, you started with the Titanic, and then you give presentations, both of you give presentations at homeschool shows, not just on heroes. I think you do World War I, World War II, and others. And what's so fascinating is that I actually knew some World War I veterans in my younger day, because they've all passed away. And in World War II, I knew these World War II veterans when they were still young men, and now they're in their 80s and 90s, the ones that are still with us. I think it's remarkable that you young folks are really interested in this, and it's that the history that we have, because we meet these people in their 80s. In fact, I have a dear friend, he's 89 now. He's actually a homeschool pioneer, Sam Blumenfeld, and he was telling me that he was shipped over he was in Italy when the war ended, and he was artillery, and he was explaining, the Germans in the Po Valley and how they surrendered and all the details. It was quite fascinating, and it's so important to get that kind of history, because these people won't be with us much longer, and it's up to us to be able to get the next message. Now, I had the opportunity a few years, it was probably about 10 years ago. I met some members of the famous Doolittle bombing mission. Are you familiar with that, the Doolittle raid, Tokyo?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually met Doolittle's co-pilot, and my son, who is now 17, he was probably 7 or 6 at the time, and I had a few of my nephews, and they said, you're going to have a chance to meet some real heroes, not rock and roll stars, not athletes, sports figures, but real men who risked their lives. They went on a mission. They knew that the mission, they may not come back, but it was an important mission. And I think that heroism is still alive and well in our country, but it's something that's sort of discouraged. But you also do, since you have this nonprofit, but I think, Benjamin, you gave a class on starting up a business or free enterprise. Is that true? Correct?
Yes. Yeah, the presentation I give was specifically on young entrepreneurship, and both how to be a young entrepreneur as well as why it's good for the individual and for society.
So just explain a little bit what you tell young people and adults at these homeschool presentations.
Sure. So specifically, the one on entrepreneurship, basically what I'm talking about is my own personal experience, which is that when I was about 10 years old, I wanted my own money, and I wanted to be able to do the things that I wanted. But to be able to do that, I needed resources, and so I wanted to get a job. But because I was 10 years old and because I was, not old enough for a job, what I did was be my own boss, and I created my own business and did it my own way to try to accomplish the goals that I'd set for myself, even though I wasn't old enough to actually enter the workforce. And so what I kind of do in my presentation is I talk about my own experience as being a young entrepreneur, and also talk about the stories of entrepreneurs such as Benjamin Franklin and Mary Kay, for instance. People that weren't necessarily super rich or super well off early in life, but got there because of their own motivation and their own self-employment. And so basically what we can see by looking at the stories of entrepreneurs and looking at the statistics is that society is really directly benefited by young people becoming entrepreneurs, because it not only benefits the individual by making them a little more educated, more comfortable with people, they have better interpersonal skills than the average kid, but in the end, when they enter the workforce for real, it actually benefits society directly. In fact, if you were to look at many extremely lucrative businesses such as Amazon, Facebook, and many others, all of them were started by young people or middle-aged people who were creating these companies as an entrepreneurial venture. So that's sort of the point of my speech on young entrepreneurship, and that's the point of the speech that I gave at that conference.
Well, you may have met my daughter, Emily, at the homeschool show in Maine. She's 10 years old, and she already has an idea what she wants to do for a living, but she's started making products, lip balm products, right? And she goes to YouTube, and YouTube is, there's a lot of junk on YouTube, but there's a lot of good stuff there, too, if you know where to find it. And she's able to make these little, and she's selling them at the homeschool show. What's great about homeschool shows is that it's not just people selling textbooks. You have a lot of young people who are homeschoolers that have their own businesses, like you do. And there's a young man here at the homeschool show in Worcester. He's from New Hampshire. He's probably about 15 or 16, and he's been here every year for the last 3 or 4 years. When he was really 12 or 13, he makes wood products. His grandfather taught him how to make certain wood turning products and beautiful things. And you see a lot of cottage type industries. There's a homeschool a couple that have make their own dresses and modest clothing. And I thought, made in USA too. That's so wonderful. And I think that's something that homeschoolers have over the public school, very much over even private school, because with private or public school, there's so many hours of institutionalization where you have to be in that building for so many hours every so many days to obey the state law. Where homeschoolers,
right.
We do have a curriculum, but we don't have to worry about study hall. We don't have to worry about all of this wasted time, and therefore you have more time to do these kinds of endeavors.
Yeah, definitely. And that's something that Benjamin and I have really appreciated, is getting to have the time to learn from Titanic heroes and to use those skills in a positive way and to spread heroism and virtue, which is something that we really wanted to focus on ever since we started the organization.
Now, heroism and virtue, these are two wonderful traits. They're godly traits. And as I said earlier, I think they're still very much alive, but they're almost discouraged. I remember I went in the Army in the 70s. It was sort of just after the Vietnam War. And I was always patriotic. My dad was a World War II veteran, and he met General Patton, and I was a World War II buff, and I just loved learning about history, and I had the utmost respect for people who put their lives on the line. And then when I went in the Army, patriotism at that time was considered foolish. It was considered passé. And although it wasn't with me, a lot of the people I said, this is wrong. I didn't go in the Army so I can get benefits. And I still, like I said, so I always believed in this country. And then I had the honor of meeting General Patton's son, whom I served under when I was stationed in Germany. And so I have, and of course, my family settled in Plymouth back in 1634, so I have that concept of history. Although that doesn't mean there are some people who are immigrants that come off the boat or come off the plane a week ago, and they are better Americans than many Americans today who just take freedom and liberty for granted. They almost don't even think about it because the refrigerators are well stocked, there's plenty of entertainment on the TV and so forth.
Right.
So, again, I was so impressed with you, both of you, and your mom. Your mom's a great lady, too, and your dad, no doubt. They must have really encouraged you. And I think that if you look at a successful person, you almost always see a parent behind them, encouraging them. And with my children, even if maybe it's something that I'm not particular, that's not my thing, if they're into it, I'm going to encourage them. Whether one of my daughters is into baking and she's into dancing, I'm going to encourage that. My 10-year-old, my son, he wants to be a gunsmith. Isn't that wonderful, my 10-year-old, if you hear in the background, she wants to be a cosmetologist, right? And she's already found the school she wants to go to. And one of the things about homeschool is one of the criticisms is they say that homeschoolers don't socialize. Why don't you address that if you could?
Yep. That's something that I do here, and for me in particular, I have started this year in particular taking classes, or one class in particular at a high school, and that class is the ROTC class. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the ROTC.
Oh, I certainly am, yes.
Yeah, and that's something that I have experienced is a lot of public schoolers having that thought process, like you said, of homeschoolers don't socialize. And I think that, I don't think that it's really particularly true. I think that homeschoolers can certainly have that perception. And I think one of the reasons for that is a lot of people, I guess what I'm trying to say is that a lot of people who are particularly smart seem almost antisocial. And it's not to say that all homeschoolers are necessarily smarter than public schoolers, because I don't think that's true at all, necessarily. But I think that because of that unique opportunity provided to homeschoolers of having that one-on-one time that perhaps isn't provided to public schoolers, that homeschoolers maybe are given something that allows them to have that perhaps social awkwardness. But I'm not sure that that's particularly true in a general sense. And I think going back to one of the things you said before about heroes and parents, I think that your point was correct. The interesting thing is all heroes have parents, and what I mean by that is that to be a hero and to do something great, it requires molding, and that molding can come from a lot of different venues. The molding can come from a parent. It can come from the friends or teachers that you have. So in that sense, obviously not every hero is a homeschooler, and the reason for that is that molding comes from all sorts of different facets. And that's really one of the reasons I think that Cady and I really enjoy Titanic Heroes, is that you analyze the stories of so many different people that have very different backgrounds. Some of them weren't particularly moral people on the Titanic, such as John Jacob Astor, who was a millionaire, who wasn't a particularly moral person. He wasn't a role model. But because of the molding that he had at that time, because of the training that he had of putting women before himself, he was able to do something heroic. So at the end of the day, I think what the important thing that Cady and I really want to drive home is that the molding, how we allow ourselves to be molded, is what's going to shape our future, and it's going to shape our future choices. So I think that the molding of our present day and who and what we allow to shape us is really one of the most important things.
Well, I look at George Washington. He's my favorite American, and I think that might be, a lot of people may think that. And it was his father and brother, his older brother, that molded him. And you look at Washington and you think, what a great man. How did he become great? Right. Well, he had a father, and he had an older brother that made that possible. And his father's job, I believe that you're put on earth for a purpose. God has, if you're in God's will, that it was his job to prepare this great man. And, and I think he's not so well known, but he should be, because he's the one that helped mold that character. And your parents, right, I'm sure, should get a lot of credit for molding your character and making what you do possible. And even though if there are some cases where the parents maybe don't encourage them, but and some people use that as an excuse. But thankfully, that's not the case with you. And I hope it won't be the case with my children when they look back and say, oh, yeah, Dad and Mom always encourage us to do the right thing. Getting back to, though, you mentioned Mr. Astor and the fact that he was not such a great guy, but in the end, he did the right thing. And I've always noticed that we meet people in our circles, people we know, read about. To me, when tragedy happens, that's when you can judge a person. That's when the true character comes out. When things are going, like the story of Job, right? God had blessed him with sons and wealth and and the devil said, yeah, I take that stuff away. He won't be such a great servant of yours. And he took it away, and he still loved the Lord, you see. So and he didn't blame God. He didn't curse God. He still believed, yep, I'm still gonna, even though they slay me, I will still trust you. And that's the character that in order for our nation to restore to its former greatness, we have to get people to understand that. And so anyway, tell me a little bit about how can people get a hold of you, can learn more about your organization, and also you do travel around the country. Although you're in Washington State, you do make a chance to come out to travel around the region.
Right. Yes. So Cady and I, just to summarize, what we do is we run a nonprofit, Titanic Heroes, and we go around the country as much as we can, and we try to spread stories of heroism in the past to influence our future. And what we believe is that by looking at stories of heroes, such as the heroes on the Titanic, by looking at past stories of heroism, what those stories can do is that those stories can help mold us in the present generation to be heroes in the same way. Although many of us may not be on board another Titanic, many of us may not be forced to jump in front of a bullet, we will have the opportunity in the small things in life and possibly in bigger things to be heroic in our everyday lives. And so that's kind of what we do as Titanic Heroes. And as far as to how people can contact us and see a little more about what we do, we have our Facebook page, which is just Titanic Heroes, and it's a nonprofit organization. It's listed as a nonprofit organization under Facebook. So it's Titanic Heroes at Facebook. And also our website, www.titanicheroes.com.
Okay, and also the books you have available, how can they get a hold of those?
Yeah.
Are they on Amazon?
Yes, the books, Cady's 2 books. The first one is called A Titanic Hero, Thomas Biles, and the second one is called The Four Immortal Chaplain's Legacy of Virtue. And those are available on Amazon.com. Our other products will be available soon on our website. We're currently redesigning it, and so those will be available then. But as of right now, the books are available on Amazon.
And you also have a couple of DVDs available?
Yes, we do. Yes. You can order those through the website. We have our email address on the website, which is info@titanicheroes.com, and the DVDs are listed on our website. You can email us, and we'll send you them.
And what's your schedule for the next couple of months? Here we are in late April of 2015. Where can people? This show goes all over the world. It's actually in short wave, so people can hear it all over the world, all over the country. So if they're listening, where will you be in the next couple of months?
So what we're looking at for the summer of 2015, we have a couple of conventions that we're going to try to make happen. One specifically in Baltimore. It's the American Legion National Convention.
Oh, wonderful.
And so our goal is to be over there near the end of August with a booth and to just tell about what we do. We have a link with the American Legion since we tell the story of the four immortal chaplains of the USAT Dorchester. And so we've done a lot with the American Legion over the past 2 years and have been really wanting to make it out to their national convention. So that's the next goal, is to get over there at the end of August. But obviously, support to make that happen. As a small nonprofit, we're always looking for donations or support from others. So any of that from any of your listeners would be greatly appreciated.
And we hope maybe, God willing, next year you'll be able to come to Camp Constitution and spend a week there. Maybe bring your mom and dad too.
That would be great.
And again, one more. We got about 30 seconds left. Give out your website again.
Sure. Our website is www.titanicheroes.com, HEROES, and you can find us on Facebook at that same address.
Okay. Thanks for coming on, and God bless your efforts.
Thank you so
much.
Well,
thank you very much for having us.
All righty. Bye now.
Bye.
You've been listening to Camp Constitution Radio, WBCQ The Planet, heard every Monday at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time in Monticello, Maine. For more information about Camp Constitution, visit www.campconstitution.net.